You're Ferro, the man my father hasn't spoken to in 20 years.
Your father didn't hate me, son. That's a story you were...
Wait, what are you talking about?
Your father didn't hate me, son.
Then why 20 years of silence?
That's not a question I can answer standing in a driveway.
Wait, you knew him before we did?
The lawyer's office smelled like old coffee and older paper, and Daniel Voss sat in the middle chair because he'd always sat in the middle, between Marcus, who arrived 10 minutes late in a suit that cost more than their father's truck, and Ezra, who hadn't shaved in what looked like a week and kept his eyes on the window instead of the desk. Their father, Elias Voss, had been dead 11 days. The funeral had been small. The silence since had been enormous. "The farm," said the lawyer, a tired man named Whitfield who'd handled Voss family paperwork for 30 years, "is to be divided equally among the three of you. 320 acres, the house, the equipment, and," he paused, adjusting his glasses, "the debts attached to it, which I should mention now total approximately $200,000. Marcus made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Of course he did. There's a note," Whitfield continued. "He asked me to read it aloud, verbatim, before you say anything else to each other." He unfolded a single sheet of paper, and Daniel recognized his father's handwriting, the same cramped, forward-leaning script that used to fill seed order forms at the kitchen table. "Boys, I know what's coming the second I'm in the ground. You'll want to sell it, split the money, and never see each other again. I'm not going to stop you, but I'm asking you to wait 90 days before anyone signs anything. 90 days, working the land together, the way we used to before you all decided the world outside was bigger than this one. If at the end of that you still want to sell, sell. I won't be there to argue." "Dad." Nobody spoke for a long moment. 90 days, Ezra finally said, quietly, like he was testing the shape of the words. "That's insane," Marcus said. "I have a firm in Denver. I have clients. I can't just—" "Nobody's making you," Daniel said, and it came out sharper than he meant it to. 12 years since he'd left this town, and somehow he was already back in the old rhythm, the middle brother smoothing things over that weren't his to smooth. Whitfield cleared his throat. "There's a condition tied to it, actually. The will stipulates that if the 90 days aren't completed, all three of you present, working the property, ownership defaults entirely to a fourth party." "What fourth party?" Marcus's voice had gone flat. Careful. Whitfield checked the document. "A Mr. Thomas Ferro. Your neighbor, I believe." The name landed in the room like a dropped plate. Daniel watched something pass across Ezra's face. Not surprise, exactly. Recognition. Like a door he'd been avoiding had just been named out loud. "Old Ferro," Marcus said slowly. "The one Dad hasn't spoken to in, what, 20 years? "Something like that," Daniel said. He didn't look at Ezra when he said it, but he felt his younger brother go very still beside him, the way a man goes still when he's holding something he doesn't want examined. They drove out to the farm separately, Marcus in a rented sedan too clean for the gravel road, Ezra in the same rusted-out pickup he'd had since he was 19, Daniel in a car with Colorado plates that felt, absurdly, like a betrayal just for existing. The house looked smaller than Daniel remembered. That was always the way with childhood places. They shrank while you weren't watching. The porch sagged on the left side, where the support beam had been rotting for years, something none of them had fixed because fixing it meant coming home, and none of them had wanted to come home. They were still standing in the driveway, three men circling a silence none of them knew how to break, when a truck, older than any of theirs, came rattling up the road and stopped at the fence line. Thomas Ferro climbed out slowly. He was maybe 70, broad through the shoulders in the way of men who'd spent a lifetime doing physical work, with a face weathered into permanent creases and eyes that moved between the three brothers like he was counting something. He was carrying a metal box, rusted at the corners, the kind of small strongbox people used to keep in barns before anyone trusted banks. Didn't want to intrude on the day you got the news, he said. His voice was low, unhurried. But your father asked me to bring this by once the will was read. Figured today was the day. Marcus stepped forward first, always the one to take charge of a room. You're Ferro. I am. You're also, apparently, about to inherit our family's farm if we don't play along with some 90-day fantasy our father cooked up. Ferro's jaw tightened, just slightly. That's not why I'm here. Then why are you here? Because he asked me to be. Ferro held the box out, and it was Daniel who stepped forward and took it, more out of instinct than decision. It was heavier than it looked. There's a letter inside. He wanted you three to read it together. Not me, not the lawyer. You three. You knew him, Ezra said. It wasn't a question. Daniel noticed his brother's hands had curled into loose fists at his sides. I knew him a long time, Ferro said, and something in the way he said it, careful, weighted, made Daniel's stomach tighten with a suspicion he couldn't yet name. Longer than either of you have been alive. Some of it. Marcus laughed, short and humorless. Great. A mystery box from the man Dad hated for 2 decades. This day just keeps getting better. Ferro's eyes settled on Marcus, and for just a moment, something like old grief moved across his face. Your father didn't hate me, son. That's a story you were told. It isn't the one that's true. He turned back toward his truck before anyone could ask what he meant. 90 days, he said over his shoulder. I'll be next door the whole time. Doesn't have to be strangers, if you don't want it to be. He drove off, and the 3 brothers stood there with a rusted box between them and 11 days' worth of grief that had just gotten considerably more complicated. They opened it at the kitchen table, the same table where their mother used to make them do homework before she died, when Daniel was 9, the same table their father had eaten breakfast alone at for the 15 years since. Inside the box, a stack of letters bound with twine, a photograph gone soft and curled at the edges, a woman's wedding ring that wasn't their mother's, and on top, a single page addressed to all 3 of them. Marcus read it aloud, because Marcus always read things aloud, needing control of information the way other men needed control of rooms. If you're reading this, Ferro brought the box like I asked. I owe you 3 an explanation I should have given you years ago, and I was too much of a coward to give it while I was alive to watch your faces while you read it. Thomas Ferro isn't just your neighbor. Before your mother, before this farm was mine, it was his family's land next door that I nearly lost everything trying to save. His sister, Eleanor, was the first woman I loved. We were going to marry. Ferro was going to be my brother twice over, once by friendship and once by law. I made a mistake that cost her that chance, and it cost Ferro his sister's trust in me, and it near cost us our friendship entire. I've spent 30 years living next door to the wreckage of that mistake, too proud to fix it, and I let that pride turn into something uglier that I taught you boys to believe, that Ferro was a man to be wary of. He never was. I was the one who should have been distrusted. I'm asking you for 90 days, not because I think you need to save a farm. I'm asking because I think you need each other, and because I think Ferro deserves better from this family than 3 more decades of silence. Whatever you decide about the land, I'm asking you to at least let him tell you the rest of it, if he's willing. I'm sorry I didn't do this while I could look you in the eye. That was always my failure. Don't let it become yours. Dad. Marcus set the letter down. Nobody spoke. Daniel picked up the photograph. A young woman, dark-haired, laughing at something outside the frame, standing in front of a barn that might have been this one, might have been Ferro's, might have been the same land before it split into 2 farms and 1 grudge. Did either of you know any of this? Marcus asked. Daniel shook his head. But he was watching Ezra, who hadn't said a word since Ferro's truck disappeared down the road, whose eyes were fixed on the ring like it belonged to him personally. Ezra. His younger brother looked up, and for the first time all day, Daniel saw something crack in his face. I need to tell you both something, Ezra said. "And I should have told you a long time ago." They moved to the porch because the kitchen felt too small for whatever was coming, and Ezra sat on the top step the way he used to as a teenager, elbows on his knees, not looking at either of them. 3 years ago, he said, when I was still drinking, really drinking, not the stuff I told you about, I got into it with Dad. Bad. I said things I can't take back and don't want to repeat. I stormed off this property, and I didn't know where I was going, and I ended up at Ferro's door at 2 in the morning like an idiot. Marcus's jaw tightened. You never told me that. I never told anyone that. Ezra rubbed a hand over his face. He let me in, didn't ask questions, made coffee, let me sit in his kitchen till I sobered up enough to drive, and he never once brought up the bad blood with Dad, never used it. He just helped me, and then he told me something. What? He told me he'd tried to make peace with Dad twice over the years. Both times Dad shut the door on him, literally once. He said he'd stopped trying because it hurt too much to keep being refused, but that he never stopped hoping one of us kids would be the one to close the gap someday. Ezra's voice caught. I never told Dad I went there. I never told either of you. I was ashamed of the drinking, and I didn't know how to bring up Ferro without explaining the rest of it. Daniel felt something shift in his chest. Not anger, though there was some of that. Mostly it was grief. Layered on grief. For all the years his family had spent constructing walls instead of doors. So you knew, Marcus said. This whole time, you knew there was more to the story. I knew there was a story. I didn't know what it was until today. Ezra looked at his older brother directly for the first time. I'm not the villain here, Marcus. I was a scared kid who didn't want you to know how bad things had gotten. That's all that was. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Daniel watched the practiced composure, courtroom composure, the kind Marcus wore like armor, slip for just a second. I left for Denver because I couldn't watch Dad grieve Mom every single day for years and not say anything about it, Marcus said finally. I told myself it was ambition. Some of it was. But mostly I just couldn't stand being in a house that quiet. He exhaled. I didn't know he was carrying this too. Another grief he never talked about. He carried a lot he never talked about, Daniel said quietly. That was kind of his whole personality. It wasn't quite a joke, but it broke something loose in the air between them anyway. Ezra huffed something that was almost a laugh. Marcus shook his head, half a smile ghosting at the corner of his mouth despite everything. For the first time since the funeral, the three of them sat in silence that didn't feel like a wall. It felt, faintly, like a beginning. The next morning, Daniel woke before dawn out of old habit, the farm kid clock still somewhere in his body even after 12 years in the city. He found Marcus already in the kitchen, standing at the window with a cup of coffee he clearly hadn't figured out how to make properly. Too weak. The way city coffee makers never got it right. Couldn't sleep, Marcus admitted. Kept thinking about the letter. Me too. They didn't say much else, but when Ezra came down 20 minutes later, already dressed for work, the three of them fell without discussing it into an old pattern. Ezra checking the equipment, Marcus reluctantly rolling up his expensive sleeves to help move fence posts, Daniel falling back into the rhythms of a body that remembered farm work even after his mind had spent over a decade trying to forget it. Ferro showed up around noon, not to intrude, just to drop off a part for the tractor that Ezra had mentioned needing. He didn't come inside. He didn't ask about the letter. He just handed the part to Ezra, nodded once at Marcus and Daniel, and turned to go. Wait, Daniel said. Ferro paused. We read it, Daniel said. The letter. All of it. Something eased in the old man's shoulders. Not relief, exactly. More like a burden shifting slightly, finding a new place to rest. Then you understand why I didn't fight the will, Ferro said. Your father named me as the fallback, not because he wanted this land. He knew I'd never take it. He named me because he knew it would force the three of you to actually look at each other instead of running the way you'd been running for years. It was never really about the farm. You could have told us that from the start, Marcus said, though there was no real edge in it now. Would you have believed me? Ferro asked, not unkindly. A stranger with an old grudge, telling three grieving men to trust him? No. Some things you have to arrive at yourselves. He looked out over the fields, weathered and patient. Eleanor passed 8 years ago, never married. I used to think that was your father's fault entirely. Took me a long time to understand grief doesn't split clean like that. Everybody carries their share. He turned back to them. 90 days is a long time to hate somebody. It's also long enough to stop, if you're willing. He left before any of them could answer that. 6 weeks in, the brothers found the second barn. The older one, half collapsed, that none of them had gone near since childhood because their father always said it wasn't safe. Marcus, restless and looking for a project his hands understood better than legal briefs, decided to clear it out. What they found inside was a version of their father none of them had known. A workshop, still set up, still holding the half-finished frame of what looked like a rocking chair, its wood gone gray with age but the joinery still precise, still careful. He never finished it, Ezra said, running a hand along the unworked edge. Do we know what it was for? Marcus asked. Daniel found, tucked into a drawer beneath the workbench, a folded piece of paper with a name and a date. For Eleanor, wedding gift. The date was 31 years old. Nobody said anything for a long time. Outside, the summer wind moved through the fields in long, slow waves, the kind Daniel remembered from being small enough to lie down in the grass and watch the whole sky move. He kept it, Marcus said eventually. All these years, never finished it, never threw it away. Maybe he couldn't do either, Daniel said. Maybe some things you're not ready to let go of, but you're not ready to face either. Ezra was quiet, turning the chair frame slowly in his hands. We could finish it, he said finally. Not to give it to anyone. Just to finish what he started. Feels wrong to leave it half done forever. Marcus looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. The calculation of a man used to weighing risk, softened by something that looked almost like hope. Yeah, he said. Yeah, okay. It took them the better part of 2 weeks, working evenings after the real farm work was done, none of them particularly skilled at woodworking, all of them stubborn enough to learn. Ferro came by twice to show them the right way to shape a joint their father had left rough. He didn't linger either time. But the second time, as he was leaving, he paused at the barn door. Eleanor loved rocking chairs, he said quietly. Used to say a house wasn't a home till it had one on the porch. He looked at the frame, half his sister's memory and half an old friend's guilt, now being finished by 3 young men who hadn't been born when the promise was made. She would have liked this. All of you, working on it together. He left before any of them could find the right thing to say back. The 90 days ended on a Thursday in late summer, the fields gold and heavy, the farmhouse porch finally repaired. Marcus had insisted on fixing the sagging beam himself, badly at first, then well enough by the end that Ezra stopped teasing him about it. They sat on that porch that evening, the finished rocking chair set beside them, not for anyone in particular, just finished, just whole. Whitfield had called that morning to confirm the terms had been met. The farm was theirs, fully, all debts and all. So, Marcus said, what do we do with it? It was the question none of them had let themselves ask out loud in 90 days. Not directly, the unspoken thing underneath every fence post fixed and every early morning worked. I don't want to sell, Ezra said quietly. I know that's not exactly a surprise from me, but I mean it different than I would have 3 months ago. I don't want to sell because I ran from a lot of things, and I don't want to run from this too. I can't move back, Marcus said. Not full time. My life's in Denver now, and that's not nothing. I built that. He paused. But I don't want to lose this either. Maybe there's a version where I'm here more than I've been. Where this isn't a place I only come back to when someone dies. They both looked at Daniel. I've been offered a job here, actually, Daniel admitted. Small clinic, 20 minutes out. I turned it down 2 years ago because coming back felt like admitting the city thing didn't work out. He looked out over the fields, gold in the last of the light. I don't think that's what it would mean anymore. Nobody made any grand declarations. There was no dramatic embrace, no speech. Just 3 brothers on a porch their father had built, watching the sun go down over land that had almost torn them apart, and instead, slowly, stubbornly, had put them back together. Ferro's porch light came on next door, small and steady in the growing dark. We should invite him for dinner sometime, Daniel said. Properly, not just fence-line conversations. Yeah, Ezra said. I think Dad would have wanted that a long time ago. Marcus picked up the rocking chair's arm, testing the joint they'd finished together. Solid now, no longer half-built. Might be time this thing had a real home, he said. Even if it's not the one it was made for. They sat together as the light faded, 3 brothers who had arrived expecting to divide something, and instead had spent 90 days learning how to share it. The land, the grief, the unfinished things their father had left behind, and, finally, each other.
3 brothers, 1 farm, and a secret buried for 30 years in a rusted metal box. What gets me about this story isn't the inheritance. It's the silence. How one man's pride kept 2 families apart for decades, and how it took his death to finally break it. Because here's the truth this story leaves us with. The things we're too proud to say out loud don't disappear. They just wait. They wait in old letters, in half-finished furniture, in neighbors we stopped talking to for reasons we can barely remember. Elias didn't leave his sons a farm. He left them a chance to stop running from each other before it was too late. So let me ask you, is there someone in your life you've gone quiet with that you could still call today? Drop a comment and tell me who came to mind. And if this story moved you, hit subscribe. There's another one waiting next week.